I know that the Pleasing Recollection was inspired by your own experiences bumping into famous people in New York in the 1970s. And I'm wondering what the process was when you two decided to turn this into a project of honing those stories down into what is now in this song cycle.
Sure. Well, actually, the way that it started was that I think in 2020, so the first few months of pandemic, Martin and I were having one of those pandemic Zoom phone calls, and Martin asked me to give him lyrics. He actually said, "I'm sick of setting the poetry of trees dancing in the German forest," or something like that. And I said, "Martin, I can't help you, because I'm not like a songwriter. Like the only way I know how to write words is for a particular character, for a libretto, most likely, or even if it was musical theater, you'd be writing for a character." So I think I said something like, I think he may have said, "Well, then why don't you write about yourself?" And so that was really the genesis of the idea. And we talked a little bit. I guess I was kind of cracking him up, telling him stories about some experiences that I had as a young man coming to New York, mid 1970s, and my adventures and misadventures, of a sort. And it's a very, as I call it, a dangerous but very exhilarating time to be in New York during that period. Anyway, I went away, and then one day I sat down and I wrote a song about an encounter I had with Leonard Bernstein at the theater. And I sent it to Martin, and you got it. And what did you do, Martin?
I set it to music. I mean, it was.
When you first got it, didn't you laugh?
Oh yes, well of course I laughed before I got it. I mean, I laughed when you told me about the story that you were going to write about. Right. I mean, on that pandemic Zoom call, I said to Steve, "Let's do something that's fun, and let's do something that's gay." And he said, "Well, I can only write from my own experiences." And I said, "Well, that's fine." And then he said, "Well, I did, pee next to Leonard Bernstein during intermission at this Broadway show." And I said, "That's it." Write that song. And then he sent it, and I wrote it, and it's kind of the center, and it's actually the centerpiece of the show. It's kind of, I mean, it's an hour-long show, but this would be I guess the end of the first act if it were 2 acts. That song.
And it wasn't just peeing; it was a conversation that we also had.
Oh yes,
we did have a conversation during the intermission of "Merrily We Roll Along," the Sondheim show. "Merrily We Roll Along." Anyway, so we didn't really know that we had a show. I sent that to Martin, and then a couple of months later, maybe I sent him a rather long, almost a monodrama. I mean, almost like a opera theater monologue about a weekend that I spent in Cortlandt Manor at the home of Aaron Copland, called Rock Hill, that I was invited to spend, and about my weekend up there, and Martin set that one. So we did about 3 songs. So we did 3 songs.
We did 3 songs, and we thought it was going to be like a song cycle, and we were going to continue adding to them. And we started recording them and workshopping them with a fine pianist and a very fine baritone who's going to premiere it this Friday. He's amazing.
He's our star, Michael Kelly.
Star, right.
Michael Kelly, baritone, opera and music theater star.
And the second piece we wrote, called Rock Hill, is about Steve's experience being invited to lunch at Aaron Copland's house. And I happened to have done a composer residency there. I stayed there for 2 months and wrote a piano trio and some other songs. And of course, Aaron Copland is, to me, and I know many, many composers and people, musicians in general, he's very important. And this was a great opportunity. And Steve also had this idea of riffing on Sondheim's A Weekend in the Country. So we kind of I kind of developed that kind of tarantella form in 6/8, and it was very pattery, pitter pattery, and it was just a delightful way to work. And then, and that's the kind of the moving music, the getting on the train, the getting in the car, that's all of that kind of 6/8 tarantella, very fast and pattery. And then he meets the guests of Aaron Copland, who are all quite, they're all famous pedagogues like Vivian Perlis and David Del Tredici.
The cultural elite.
Right, the conoscenti.
And I was in my, I was before 25, I was in my early 20s.
So then all these moods start changing, and then he's like, "Well, I'm really over my head here," and the music gets kind of awkward and and then he's presented. Eventually, he's presented with this appetizer at lunch, and it's a globe artichoke, and he's like, he doesn't know what it is and what to do with it. So this internal monologue ensues that Steve wrote and I set about, watching everyone and imitating them and doing exactly what they do. And it goes from like a rumba, and then it goes into a waltz and all. It's really quite interesting. And then he comes to this point where all the leaves are, littering the table, the artichoke leaves, and then everyone reaches the spine, that choky part, and he has no idea what to do, and he kind of has like this mini nervous breakdown. And as a young gay man, it was kind of important to me to write, and it's called Sad Young Man, and he goes into this dark place of low self-esteem and low confidence, and he's like, "Oh, I'm not worthy to be here, and I'm in over my head," and it's kind of this little sad arietta, and he but
Aaron Copland actually what he did was he took the choke out and took the heart out and gave it to me on my plate.
Right. So he helped the
that's what happened at that lunch table. Yeah.
Sounds to me almost like, that movie about James Whale, Gods and Monsters.
Oh yeah.
It was like you had the East Coast equivalent of that with Aaron Copland.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, he was the only time I'd met him was that weekend, and there were other guests that were there, but I did take a walk with him one afternoon and talk to him, and I listened to him play this piano in the big, beautiful wood studio.
There's a beautiful,
paneled with gorgeous views of the sylvan, woods of Westchester County up there. The thing, Craig, about the piece is it's an older man looking back and reflecting on things that he just didn't know or understand until you're older, and you can look back and say, "Oh, now I get it. Now I understand." So it is a journey, but it's a universal journey. It's the universal journey of how do you keep making discoveries as you mature and as you age, and at what point do you realize that these were all formative? These were all part of what made you who you are today. So by the fact that there were a number of people, and more than, of course, this piece is about, I didn't really have, a true appreciation for how privileged I was to have these experiences, because you're just a young buck. And I don't think it matters if you're gay or you're straight or you're non-binary or however you identify. It's a person, it's the journey of a person. And I think that's the universal nature. And so, by the way, after we recorded these few songs with Michael, we looked at them and we said, well, we think we have actually a narrative. We think we have a story here with some sort of linear structure. And Michael Kelly, we were on a Zoom call with him, and he said, basically, why don't you just write a show for me? Like, why don't you just write a show for me?
We were going to do another piece with a tenor and a baritone a different story,
Right.
and then just keep this piece smaller. But Michael actually, he said, well, wait a second, let me argue on defense of just doing one show about this character for me. And
Like buyer and seller, like he kept talking about.
that was the template.
Right, like Michael Urie and buyer and seller.
Right.
So we were very convinced and very kind of, encouraged by his passion for it as well. And he made some good arguments, and we thought, yeah, let's do it. So Steve started inserting these narrative monologues, and we came up with a first draft of what it could be, but then I wanted it to be more sung through. And so I asked Steve to take these beautiful sections of monologue and turn them into songs. I identified, I said, that's a song right there. That's a song. That's another song. And then, there could still be there still is monologue within this song, but it's lifted up on a kind of jazzy recitatives or recitative music, jazz stylings and things that really keep it moving, even though it's monologue. And the monologue is from maybe I'm talking too much now, but the monologue is from the point of view of the older man, and the song is then the younger man in those formative experiences.
Right. Now, I see that it's called a cabaret opera. Given, who you have singing it, I understand the impulse for the opera. But at what point did you feel like this not only was ultimately a cabaret opera, but also needed to be a hybrid of multiple styles to be effective in telling the story?
I wanted to set it, and did set it. I wanted it to be set in an atmosphere where the audience would be seated at tables and be able to drink, because I felt that this story begins essentially with my first job. I was still a student at NYU, and I got a job playing the piano and singing at a gay bar on Grove Street called Maurice Crisis. It's actually still there. And I was probably 22 at the time, 22. And the way that it was envisioned and the way that our director, Murphy Davis, has directed it, it's a reflection of the older man coming back into the club, and the pianist who's there, Bénédicte Jourdois, who's magnificent. I mean, she's a magnificent pianist and exhilarating. And she does not lift her fingers from the keyboard from the moment it starts, right? She plays 65 minutes straight because it's entirely scored. It's entirely scored. And they make a connection to each other. And that idea is something that we thought would unify the whole piece. The reason it's a cabaret opera is that it's pastiche. I mean, Martin writes for the musical theater voice, but he uses tropes that come straight out of musical theater, but in very inventive and very ingenious ways. And also too, I would say that the libretto, it reads more as a narrative libretto than, let's say, songs that are separated. And we also, I thought that the best place to premiere this would be at Feinstein's, 54 Below. And that's where it's actually going to have its New York debut. We're doing previews here in Key West. We have our performances in New York next week. And then we have it booked. It's booked. It's going to open the performing season at Fire Island Pines at Whitehall there, which is the Fire Island Pines Art Project, right?
May 29th.
Yeah, the Memorial Day weekend. And then it's going to close in June, the last weekend in June, at the Palladium Theater in St. Petersburg, Florida, as an official St. Pete Pride event. So it's definitely been booked in venues, and there's other venues that we're just waiting to hear back from. It's portable, Craig. It's portable. One singer, one piano, no set, no costumes, no props.
And your pianist probably doesn't have an exclusive deal with a Yamaha or a Steinway, so you could bring in anything you wanted.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. She's actually on the staff of the Met Opera, and she's on the staff of Juilliard as well. So
Right.
yeah, she's magnificent.
Mhm.
And you mentioned, the Leonard Bernstein song, peeing next to him during Merrily We Roll Along, which of course happened after the 1970s. So I'm assuming that some of these stories were just transported into the 70s era because it doesn't have to specifically be about when it really did take place.
Well, yes, actually, the Aaron Copland thing was in 1981. The piece is, I would say it's more self-referential than autobiographical. And I make this distinction only because I recently learned that from Michael R. Jackson. Michael R. came to Key West here and spent about 8 or 9 or 10 days here. And many of those days I spent with him. And he just slayed me with his brilliance and his sense of humor and his riffing and his just like gossipy, hysterical things that he said about everybody. And when we talked about, this piece, he said, it's self-referential. It's not autobiographical. And he said, that gives you permission essentially to take episodes from your life, but reorder them in a way. So, and also too, it's a work that pays homage to people, but we also wanted to make sense, to tell a story. It's not a documentary.
Right. It's not. And plus, I moved to New York City in the 1970s, and Steve's stories I felt as my own. And that's one of the reasons it was a joyful process, setting them to music and figuring out how to do it. I just understood it every moment of everything that was going on. So I feel that the character is almost an amalgamation of both of us.
It's our baby.
It's our baby. You had the sperm.
Yeah, definitely.
I was the mother.
Shut up. We probably stood at the bar at Boots and Saddles in like 1978 or 79 or something and didn't even know it. But it does take us through 1981. And 1981 is when I met my husband, married for almost 41 years. So, he actually has been telling me that I never had a life before him. He's been like, you never had a life before me, ever. Well, I did. So did Martin.
Right. Well, with all the references that you're able to make in the libretto, I assume you're equally able to make references, musically. And I haven't been able to hear everything, but at least in Tony and Bobby, which is one of the songs that I have heard, obviously there's being alive is echoed, at the end of it by virtue of the person at the center of the story. But it also and I'm hearing Gershwin's Third Prelude. I'm hearing Take 5 by Dave Brubeck. I'm hearing all kinds of things. Can you tell me about some of the work that you've chosen to pay homage to by building references to them within these songs?
And West Side Story and Follies.
Well, Tony and Bobby, that was the third song Steve wrote and then I sent to me, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I was like, can I do this? Can I do this? And I immediately just got my score to West Side Story and played through it, and watched the film twice. I got now this one is not. This one is the company, yeah, because of Bobby.
It's got both West Side Story.
I didn't really understand company, so I printed out the full score from that free kind of thing on the web and printed it out, and I played through it and listened to it, and why had I never understood this show? It's wonderful. Mm-hmm. And the sound of the company itself, like the people, and it was just amazing. And then I went through Follies again, which I knew a little better because Steve did some of the the meters and the rhyming schemes, he kind of paid homage to some of the parts of Follies, and he said, take a look at that section. And I looked at that, and then I was trying to come up with I started listening to 60s and 70s jazz and trying to come up with some kind of down and a dirty feel to it, but like something that went on. And yeah, and I played through Take 5, and I mean, who wrote that? Dave Brubeck didn't actually write it; somebody else wrote it. But I thought, well, and 5/8 is one of my favorite things to use, and I thought, well, I'm going to use that too. So I mean, it's different than Take 5, but it's got the same beat, and I felt that really established the entrance from, the kid gets off the Staten Island ferry and he enters Manhattan, and I thought that gave the that sense of the street and the tone and the danger and the excitement.
The very first libretto that I worked on, for Martin, was an opera theater monologue called An Incident in Sutton Square. And it's about a young man who has a form of OCD called arithmomania, and he counts in 5. And the libretto, has meter in there. And when Martin read it, he was like, "Wow, I can write
5/8.
I can write. I
mean, it goes into this suspended kind of 5/8. Right, ostinato that is very effective for it.
He likes those 5s.
I really do like 5/8, 7/8, but also I learned so much about this time. I said I need to really write this well. I mean, don't just give up on trying to find rhythmic counterpoint for the piano part, so that I just don't want to make chords and accompany the vocal part. I mean, the vocal part is easy for me, but I was just very proud of some of the counterpoint in there and some of the interior beats and the off beats and the jazz in it, actually.
Remember what Bob used told near the end of Company: don't be afraid that it won't be perfect, just be afraid that it won't be.
That's right.
Right.
And Larry Kurt really did come into that recording studio wearing a full-length fur coat. And I'd never, ever seen a man in a fur coat, let alone a full-length one.
I saw Mikhail Baryshnikov in a fur-length coat, and he cruised me. That never turned into one of the stories that you have.
I've looked at the Instagram account for the show, and they're made on time, and obviously to Copeland, to Leonard Bernstein, Charles Ludlam, Larry Kurt. All these people that we know are famous people who, whether they were openly gay or ultimately came out as gay. And I'm wondering if there were people that you stumbled upon that are not in the public eye as having been gay that were a temptation to include in these stories. Or maybe now that maybe some of them are deceased, and what difference does it make?
You mean the men? I mean, there were women as well, but.
Well, yeah, but I'm assuming that most of this are stories.
No, I would say that there probably were a handful of others that we talked about, but I thought that it wasn't really the right time for me to actually. It probably wasn't the right time. But you know what? Even though the songs were not written or they're not part of this, it's the same experience. They just haven't been committed to structure and form and being set, by the composer. But the theme is still the same. But I can't say there's anybody specifically who was. Well, that's not really true. Actually, that's not true. There's a very famous soap opera actor that is referred to in the piece, who was not out.
Right, he was both in and out.
He was in and out, and Martin experienced this more than I did, not for himself, but knew more people like that. And I didn't really get that. I didn't get that. How could you be in and out at the same time? And I don't know. You know, also too, Craig, we made this really very, very, very deliberate choice that we wanted to write a piece that was about the journey of a gay man, but that did not deal with self-loathing, you know, difficulty coming out.
There's a little bit of self-loathing in that one little artichoke.
He calls it the self-loathing part, but I don't call it that. You know,
I ended up having to cut it actually because I added too much self-loathing to it.
Right. I wanted a piece that was joyful and had a happy ending, and it does. And
it's positive, yeah.
And the reason is because it's true. That's why.
Yes.
And we don't deal with AIDS particularly, even though it's part of the period, it is mentioned.
We do mention it.
It is mentioned, but it's because there really are so many pieces, theater pieces, film pieces, song cycles, settings that deal with these subjects. They're legion, and that's fantastic. But there aren't just, I think, enough stories that are just joyful stories about experiences of gay men and, you know, and lesbians for that matter. So.
And I would think, you know, that any gay man who comes of age in New York in the 70s and comes out of it to be able to be a character in the song cycle is not grateful for the opportunities that he might have had, but also grateful to be alive.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. So so our story is about this particular journey. It's a different journey, but the same journey that I think other people have had as well.
Of course. Now, New York City and gay culture has changed massively since you were playing piano at Maurice Crisis.
That's right.
Those without
and the duplex.
Yeah, and
Mickey's. Right.
Well, what would each of you like people to know about what this era was like, and why is it important? You know, 'cause a lot of people say, well, that was before my time. Why should I care? Why should I pay attention? But, you know, what's important for people to know about what this time was like for you personally and just in general for the world at large?
70s. Why is the 70s? Like Emily's question. What does the 70s mean to you?
Well, we were doing the 70s in New York City, but it's the sexual revolution, you know, in full flower. And it, you know, promiscuity was kind of de rigueur, you know, like people slept with each other. I mean, I remember men, women, whatever. There was such the kind of boundaries of homosexuality, heterosexuality. I mean, they kind of disappeared for a while. I mean, in the culture of New Hope, Pennsylvania, where I was, and in New York City, I felt that very strongly from women and men. There was there was just this like sexual. The hunt was on, and it was open, and I mean, it just wasn't. And it just wasn't gay cruising. I mean, I know there were, you know, all the wonderful, I'm not going to say wonderful, all the opportunities, you know, the mine shaft and the river and
that's not in this at all. That's not it.
No, but I'm just talking about just being on the subway and the way people would look at each other. I mean, there was like a boldness to people searching each other, and it just wasn't cruising. It was. I
think I know what Martin said. It was an era of smoldering. And I think the reason is this: all of the countercultural revolutions that deal with gender and sex, sexual orientation that started in the 1960s, the 1970s is really where they manifest themselves. And they do so in extraordinary ways. It's also the same era, remember, it's bookended by Nixon and Reagan with Jimmy Carter in the middle there, you know, and Ford for a little bit. But I mean, talk about like getting whiplash. I mean, going from left to right and right to left. And it's also a period, I think, where people were feeling that they could, as Martin said, be on the hunt. And the hunt didn't necessarily need to be sexual, but it was the hunting for the meaning of existence,
Yeah,
the meaning of
that's
life,
what,
you know, from
yeah,
a socio-cultural perspective.
like recognizing there, I almost like a hunt to find the commonality in each other.
Right.
And I mean, there was also all experimentation and freedom. And I mean, of course, I think I was in Washington. I marched in a gay liberation parade in 1971. I think it was the second year that the gay liberation parade happened. That was remarkable. You know, holding, actually these guys, they put makeup all over me and like kind of skag dragged me. And we just held each other's arms and walked through the streets of Washington, D.C. And then we got to the monument.
Is that Nixon? Nixon was in, president?
I guess he was, yeah.
Oh, right.
And it was absolutely thrilling. It was, and the kind of camaraderie, I mean, it helped me as a young man after, you know, having been in the closet for so long. But then that progressed. And I mean, of course, there were downsides to this where, you know, the sexual promiscuity just went so far.
Sure.
And of course, as we know, then that it didn't cause AIDS, of course, but it allowed AIDS to kind of really hit our community hard.
Right, and I have to say, sorry to interrupt, but the reason I asked this question is because people don't rely on the kind of personal connections that either of you were able to make, and the kind of conversations that you had and experiences you had that lead to the kind of stories that are being told in this, because they're relying on this.
Oh yeah.
You know, and it's like, to me, what I think is most intriguing to me about this documents a time and a place where actually people were forced to have one-on-one conversations or experiences with people, and not just a text, and not just an emoji, and not, you know, using an app to maybe, you know, take care of 30 minutes of pleasure. And for one, I mean, I was born in '61. I'm nostalgic for a time when people don't rely on technology and actually, you know, can see and hear one another. And I'm wondering how much you feel like it is a pleasing recollection to go back and look at that time when that's how we lived.
Well, you know, in one of,
I think so.
Yeah, and there's one of the sections which is about Charles Ludlam, and the older man is talking about the connection that the younger man made, and he says, what's that line? He says something like, things were possible back then.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, how could you forget it? I wrote it, I already forgot it. But it's something like,
back then,
there were more possibilities. There were more possibilities for connecting with people than there are now. And I think you're absolutely right, because of the kind of electronification, if you will, the digitalization.
Right. And, you know, also let's just talk about kind of the Greek legacy of, you know, mentoring the younger gay people, like the older teachers, you know, mentoring.
Well,
and that idea of being with a community and then interacting with,
sure,
you know, older men as well as, you know, men your own age, and having, you know, a variety of relationships with them. I mean, you know, like, I mean,
and not all
formative relationships with my piano teacher.
Yeah, and not sexual. They're
but
just
then we were sexual for a while, and then we weren't.
Sorry.
but there was.
So here I am trying to say it's not sexual.
No, I mean, I don't know, but that's
teacher.
the thing about the 70s. The sexual, it was just part of everything, and I think that's something really wonderful.
I did not have sex with my piano teacher, just for the record. All right.
That's all good either way. But it is interesting because, you know, I make references to something 20 years old, you know, to gay friends of mine, and they look at me like I'm talking about the Dark Ages. So
Sure.
when, the names that I listed earlier, Sondheim, Copeland, Bernstein, Ludlum, Larry Kurt, they might know Sondheim just because of all the attention that was rightly accorded him on his passing in November. But I'm not sure how many people would know the rest of them. And I'm not sure how many of them would care because there isn't that mentorship.
Yeah. I mean, we
Mentorship, yes.
mentorship, right? And
And education.
yeah,
I mean,
right.
it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Right, but I feel like a work like this, from what I know about it, could be a springboard for people to go, okay, so now what have I missed out? What don't I know yet?
Yes,
Right,
yes.
right.
I
Yeah.
hope so. Yes.
But I at the same time, Greg, I will say that some of the younger people that I've talked to have mentioned that they're nostalgic for this, like the 70s, maybe like the late 70s, early 80s. And I said, well, why? And they go, well, things just seemed like they were simpler then. And be simpler? Well, I'm not sure any time was really simpler when you were living through it. Again, that's the whole idea of, like people say, oh, the world is coming to an end, now because of what's going on. And I said, well, it's like every 10 years, wherever I've been, the world's been coming to an end, starting with Duck and Cover in the 1950s, I mean, and then into the Cold War. And then, so whatever. I mean, every decade has had its own, the world's coming to an end. But people I have heard are nostalgic for this period. I mean, you see it in popular culture, like that whole Netflix series, Halston, right? I mean, that was, of course, specifically about this gay subculture, but other series, that you see, people nostalgic for a period before the digitalization and the impersonalization, where people can really connect with each other.
Yeah. But I understand your concern. I mean, I actually wrote up a whole bunch of footnotes of these historical characters, which infuriated my
right.
collaborator here.
Right.
Because I said, my sister and her wife are going to come. I don't think they know who Larry Kurt is. I mean,
they'll get it.
But even they're in their 60s now. But I'm glad I wrote them out. And Charles Ludlum is, I mean, even though he died of AIDS right before he was going to break into like a major movie career as a character actor, unfortunately. But I mean, he was famous to us who had lived in New York City and had gone to see Camille or Irma Vep or is it Irma Vep, Charles Bush? No,
that's all.
Yeah.
The Mystery of Irma Vep. That's one of the biggies, right?
Right. That's what
Camille,
the one I
Bluebeard.
saw.
Sure.
And but I understand it's
Dallas.
And it's
the ventriloquist.
Right. Well, I saw that in retrospect.
The ventriloquist wife.
Right.
Do that.
That's the one that played for a long time, right?
Yep.
Well, and then Irma Vep played for a very long time.
She's no dummy.
He's no dummy, right?
But then to learn about Larry Kurt and the fact that I didn't know that he in particular was so outrageously gay in the 70s in New York City. And he just like walked around, like with fur coats and, but I didn't know that he was nominated for a Tony, even though he was cast second in as Bobby, that he took over from Dean
Jones in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks after the show opened.
It was fascinating. Yeah. What I remember was in 1989 or 90, I saw him on the Tonys sing "Being Alive," and he had that look, that AIDS look. Horrible. And that was a year or two before he died. Yeah. And I was in the closet about my own HIV status at that point, and I was, oh my God, he's dying of AIDS and he's singing "Being Alive," and I had been playing "Being Alive" at all of these every memorial or funeral that I went to. Everyone was singing "Being Alive," and then I was in the closet about being HIV positive. But it was very meaningful to me to deal with these characters and research them myself. Yeah. I mean, I think historical, I guess this is a historical piece in a sense. And I think it's all worthwhile doing research and going back to it and learning, so much. The Pleasing Recollection.
Right. Well, let me finish by asking you both one probably not so simple question. What do you think the younger versions of yourselves would think if they saw The Pleasing Recollection?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I think that the younger version of myself would like it. I think that he would like it because it would remind him of the questions he asked himself about how he wanted to move on with his life. That's what I think. Yeah. I think, yeah, my younger version would like it.
So the younger version when I was in the 70s.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'd be wowed by this pianist. I think I'd be very attracted to Michael Kelly.
Gotta go right there. You go to the visceral, to the carnal.
Sorry, I think I would be. This is a hard question for me. This is a very good question. I think I would understand it in a way because at that point I had come through the mentorship of some older men who really helped me understand who I was, and I like the company of older men. I mean, I like the company of younger men too, but I really did enjoy, the intellectual discourse and
yes,
not only talking about piano but talking about opera and art and not only with that piano teacher that I mentioned, but other people. So I think it would make sense. Like I would recognize it. I would recognize things in it. I would say, oh, because I think like Stephen, I also was lucky to be mentored, to be befriended by other wonderful older gay men,